Greetings, historians, from the library once again here. APUSH Unit 13, The Great Depression and the New Deal. Causes of the Great Depression. Number of causes. One is the overextension of credit, for example, buying stock on margin, and this led to overproduction. And when the bubble burst, a lot of people were left badly in debt. Maldistribution of wealth, agricultural surpluses of the 20s continued on into the 30s, exacerbated by the Dust Bowl of 1935 through 38. High tariffs, this idea of protectionism against foreign goods, and the failure of the Fed to increase the money supply at a time of economic contraction. So a number of things all feeding upon themselves, making the crash bad. The Smoot-Hawley tariff, this is 1930. This, remember, a tariff is an import tax on foreign imports to encourage Americans to buy local, to buy American-made domestic goods. Herbert Hoover's responses to the New Deal. What was conservative? Cutting taxes, urging charities to help, urging businesses to maintain wages and for workers not to ask for raises, and to be real steadfast in his opposition to any welfare to individuals, saying this would sap Americans' character. Some things that were liberal for the time. He did increase government work projects, and the Reconstruction Finance Corporation gave loans to banks, to insurance companies, to railroads, to industry. The idea of pumping money into businesses, a little bit of this trickle-down idea that if they stay afloat, if you help them out, they will stay able to employ Americans. And this continues into FDR's time in office, the RFC, that is. The bonus army, about 43,000 marchers. Usually you hear there's about 20,000. Those are the vets themselves, but these are World War I vets and their family, and they're marching on Washington, D.C. to demand that Congress give them their promised World War I pension, which they were supposed to get in 1945. They're supposed to get $500 if you served stateside, $625 if you served overseas, plus there's some interest on this. They wanted this now. They needed it, and Hoover did give them, when they're camping on the Anacostia Flats there along the Potomac River, he is doing some nice things. He's giving them, ordering the military to give them some tents and some food rations. But when A. Mitchell Palmer, the Attorney General, orders them to leave, there's a shooting where two of these vets die. At this point, Hoover says, you got to go. He sends the Army in. He's asking the Army to, use a softer touch. And Douglas MacArthur, who's in charge of the roundup, basically ignores the president, and there's 55 vets injured. There's 135 arrests. There is a wife of one of the vets who miscarries, and the baby dies. And on film here, you see the shacks being burned and bulldozed. You basically see kind of a thuggish response to peacefully camped out protesting vets. You see the heavy hand of the government. And Hoover's going to be blamed for this sort of hard-heartedness against these men who serve their country. And they're just asking to fast forward the promised money, which Congress votes very decisively not to give them at this time. The 100 days when FDR is sworn in, there is a flurry of early legislation showing full support of the Democratic congressional majority that something needs to be done. And remember, FDR comes into office and he's promising that there will be bold experimentation. The New Deal is the name of this relief program, a relief, recovery, and reform program, to give you the three R's. The three R's here are relief, that's immediate help; recovery, this is actions that work to restart the economy; and reform are permanent changes to avoid a future collapse. Frequently you'll see these alphabet soup agencies called the three R's. And for our test coming up here, you should know in detail these programs and what they addressed. The CCC is the Civilian Conservation Corps, perhaps one of the more popular programs, providing unemployment for men to go into the woods and build trails and picnic shelters and campgrounds and fight forest fires and plant trees. The PWA is the Public Works Administration, and this built roads and government buildings and sewers and sidewalks and schools and tunnels and all sorts of sort of civil engineering type projects. And the goal here is temporary employment for those who are unemployed. The FSRC provided millions of pounds of surplus food for those who are hungry. The NYA is the National Youth Administration, providing jobs for high school and college students. The SEC is the Security Exchange Commission, which is set up to watchdog the stock market so that securities that are floated will be more transparent, will be more honest, there'll be less shady dealings here. The FDIC is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, part of the Glass-Steagall Act, which insures bank deposits at the time up to $5,000, currently up to $25,000 per person per deposit here in a bank. That's covered. HOLC is the Home Owners Loan Corporation, which refinanced about 1 million people's mortgages so that they could afford paying what they owed, basically reducing the interest owed over time. The Glass-Steagall Act prohibited commercial banks from being involved in investment banking. And this lasts all the way up till 1999. A little synthesis here, thinking ahead. The Glass-Steagall Act basically provided stability for decades after it was enacted. 1999, when the banks are free basically to take the money and everybody's money in the country and use it as a big, casino crapshoot, there will be the Great Recession of 2008 because of this sort of profligate, irresponsible investments. Maybe a little editorial here on my part. But the Glass-Steagall Act, the idea is to have two types of banks. You can put your bank in your money in a bank that won't invest in high-risk stocks and securities and bonds, or you can. AAA is the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, which pays farmers basically to reduce food production, trying to bring farm prices up by reducing overproduction. TVA is the Tennessee Valley Authority. The purpose is to build hydroelectric dams, providing electricity to draw industry into the poorer area of Appalachia, to also provide flood control and indirectly here recreation with the water, the lakes behind the dams. The NRA is the National Recovery Act, and the goal here is to allow businesses to meet together to plan for how to revive industrial output. They can divide the market, they can set limits on production, they can set codes. Basically, they can raise prices here. And workers get Section 7A, and that allows them to strike, to collectively bargain. It also sets up minimum wage and maximum hours. The FLSC, the Federal Labor Standards Act, sets up the 40-hour work week with overtime. Security, Social Security is the Social Security Act sets up unemployment insurance, old age pensions, aid to dependent children, and money for the disabled. And most famously, it's the old age pensions you get when you retire. The Wagner Act allows collective bargaining and allows unions to set up what's called the closed shop. That's where once you get the job, you have to join the union, you have to pay dues. The WPA is the Works Progress Administration. A lot of redundancy here. The PWA and the CWA and the WPA all provide jobs, basically building something. But one of the things that the WPA does, which it is noted for, is it provides artists with jobs. It provides artists and muralists and actors and musicians to do their stuff. Differences between the Progressive Era and the New Deal. The Progressive Era occurred in a time of prosperity, and the goal here is to limit businesses. Think of Teddy Roosevelt and Taft and their trust busting, and think of the breakup of Standard Oil and Northern Securities owned by J.P. Morgan, and the limiting of railroad freight rates by the Interstate Commerce Commission. Think about expanding the vote. Greater participation, the 17th Amendment allowing direct election of senators, 19th Amendment allowing women to vote. Think of the Australian ballot, the secret ballot here. Think of initiative, referendum, and recall, basically increasing the franchise and limiting big business. The New Deal occurred during a time of depression and poverty, and the goal here is to not to limit business, but to perhaps set them a little bit free with the NRA to provide jobs, and all these alphabet soup jobs, the NYA and the PWA and the CWA and the WPA, the TVA, all these, these jobs, these programs provide jobs. Something that isn't part of the progressive era. Conservative criticisms of the New Deal: it greatly expanded American debt. It expanded the size and scope of government, and if you're against bureaucracy, well, this increased the bureaucracy. It increased taxes, and it interfered with the free market. One of the complaints against the TVA is private companies that had set up hydroelectric companies now are competing with basically dams that are providing not free electricity, but much below the cost that the private hydro was charging. And there's this criticism that the government is perhaps extending the Depression by not allowing the free market just to correct itself. Differences between the 20s and the 30s in literature. In the 20s, the literature, think of the Lost Generation, criticism of materialism and the sort of the vapid emptiness of the the happy slappy life back then. And the 30s, think of perhaps John Steinbeck here, the call for unity, the call for solidarity in the face of poverty and suffering, injustice and greed. Two different time periods, two different criticisms. The Dust Bowl, you see the Okies and the Arkies. These are farmers, many of them sharecroppers, many of them white, leaving this central part of the country that's experiencing drought. This would be parts of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, New Mexico, and Colorado. Drought affected about 100 million acres, about 500,000 homeless in this period between 1935 and 38. And Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath famously talks about the Joad family getting in their jalopy, and they're heading for farm work, peace work out in the Salinas Valley, out in California. The CIO is not a government program, but you should know it is a union, which is an industrial union. This is organizing all the workers in a factory, and their method here is a sit-down strike. When the Fisher Body Plant workers find out that GM is getting ready to move the dies, the machines, to another plant, they have this famous, I think it's over a month, it's like 44 days or something like that, this long sit-down strike, and GM folds. The UAW, the United Auto Workers, which had 30,000 workers in a year between 37 when GM caves in here and 38, the membership goes up to 500,000. So this is a time period where there is support by the government for unions, and you will have the Wagner Act. The Wagner Act, which I skipped when we were going over some of these agencies here, allows collective bargaining, allows striking, allows picketing, and allows the closed shop. Or maybe we did go over this. Anyhow, the Wagner Act, once again, is pro-union, and the Roosevelt administration is very much pro-labor. Schechter versus the U.S., this is the Supreme Court decision that overturns the NRA, which Roosevelt considered to be sort of the core of the plan for recovery, this sort of corporate collusion and conspiracy, if you want to think of it that way, corporate getting together and dividing the market and setting up codes and production quotas and things like that. This is struck down as what it violates here is giving legislative power to an executive agency. Butler versus the U.S. strikes down the Agricultural Adjustment Act. The argument here is that you can't use the Interstate Commerce Clause to regulate intrastate commerce. So this is a conservative court striking down two centerpieces of the New Deal. Roosevelt's response: when he's reelected in 1936, he feels he has a mandate, and he's asking Congress to give him the power to appoint 6 more justices to the Supreme Court. He wants to pack the court. This is called the court packing scheme. And it seems like he's going to pull this off. Why not? He's got a crushing victory here once again, and the Democrats control the House and the Senate, and surprisingly the Democrats resist this plan. They do not allow him to pack the court. Remember the Supreme Court, the the Congress, the president cannot fire them, and they cannot have their salaries reduced. They can be impeached, but that's a sort of very exceptional, impeached and convicted. That's a very exceptional thing, which has never happened to the Supreme Court. The size of the U.S. government during the New Deal, it explodes. It becomes huge. The bureaucracy grows, taxes increase, and conservatives are very concerned here about the debt piling up and the government increasingly, involved in people's lives. The new Roosevelt coalition that comes about because of the New Deal is this group of Democrats which aren't always, seeing eye to eye, but they're each getting a piece of the pie here. You have the urban immigrants, your Catholics and Jews, especially on the East Coast, are very pro-New Deal. That's sort of historically Democrats are more pro-immigrant. You have blacks who are being included in not all, but many of the programs of the New Deal. The WPA, the PWA under Harold Ickes, and the CCC, and the NYA, the National Youth Administration, all are seeing about 10%, sort of a quota put aside for jobs for what they would call Negroes at the time, for African Americans. Eleanor Roosevelt is pushing for welfare benefits for African Americans, and blacks are seeing that they're getting included, that the government is concerned for them. It's not perfect, and you have many many blacks are being excluded in the South in local programs, but the president is sympathetic to employing blacks. They are included in not every, but in many of these programs. And you see this huge shift here. Lincoln's party, the Republicans, was the party that protected blacks in the South during Reconstruction, but during the New Deal, you see a shift where blacks can vote. They're moving from the Republican to the Democratic Party. So here you have the urban immigrant groups, you have blacks, you have unions. These unions, for example, the UAW, which in 1938 increases to 500,000 members, they're voting Democrat. You have Southerners, which historically have voted Democrat because it's the party of Lincoln that defeated them. And then you have liberals, people who are the inheritors of sort of these Eugene Debs socialist progressive ideas. So collectively, they're giving Roosevelt 4 terms in office before he dies. Prohibition will be repealed, and the plan here is to raise taxes. The government needs money to run these programs. And even before repeal happens under the 21st Amendment, you have the Beer and Wine Revenue Act, which starts taxing beer and wine. And how can you pull this off? When prohibition is still in effect, well, you just redefine what an intoxicating beverage is. You just define the alcoholic limit down a bit until you get repeal done. The Roosevelt recession in 1937, after Roosevelt is sworn in, after he's been won his second election, he reduces government spending, and the economy tanks once again. And Roosevelt he didn't anticipate how much the economy depended upon government spending at this point in history. You also have the first Social Security taxes kicking in, taking money out of paychecks. So that, with lessened government help, shows the economy still was weak. Unemployment in 33, remember, was when Roosevelt was sworn in, when he's inaugurated, about 25%. 37, it's down to about 10%. It's dropped quite a bit. But within a year, during the Roosevelt recession, it jumps back up to about 20%. So it's a recession within, or recession within a depression, or depression within a depression, however you want to call it. Remember, the Depression was a term was used at this time to avoid the more scary word, which was a panic. But nowadays we use depression to talk about a severe downturn. Civil rights in the 1930s, with the exception of blacks being included in many New Deal programs, you have very little you have nothing. No press against official Jim Crow and the Ku Klux Klan and lynching. These things are still going on in the South. And why doesn't FDR do anything? Because he desperately needs this coalition to hang together. He has opposition from the right, opposition from the Republicans, and it does grow as longer he's in office. And FDR needs Southern whites to support these programs to fight for recovery, for employment, and for reform, for the New Deal. So there you have it. Study hard, study smart, and study early. Good luck.